and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson. Coming up in today's program, as the Ukrainian capital faces one of its deadliest Russian strikes in months, the US President Donald Trump is accusing President Zelenskyy of jeopardizing peace efforts by not recognizing Russian control of the Crimean Peninsula. Plus, we're going to be taking a look back at some of the week's main developments in Washington. We'll have the latest on the Trump administration's tariff policies. We'll be talking about the future of Elon Musk and a drop in tourist numbers to the United States. All of that under discussion. Hello and welcome to the program. We're going to begin in Ukraine, where the capital city Kyiv has faced one of its deadliest Russian strikes in months. At least 9 people are reported to have been killed, dozens more injured in those overnight attacks on at least 13 sites, which caused multiple fires and left people trapped under the rubble and debris. All these strikes came during a visit to South Africa by the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. Well, following those strikes, the US President Donald Trump took to Truth Social and slammed the Russian President Vladimir Putin. He wrote, "Vladimir, stop," saying that the strikes were not necessary and that this came at a bad time. He said, "Let's get the peace deal done," President Trump implored. Well, let's kick off with a discussion between Jan Halper Hayes, a former member of President Donald Trump's White House transition team. Welcome back to you, Jan. And we're also joined by Sir Gerald, Howarth, the former UK Defence Minister, who joins us from the United Kingdom. Thank you both very much indeed for being with us once again. You've both met before, in fact, on this very programme. I'd like to start by just looking at some of the language coming out of Washington the last 24 hours or so. President Trump suggesting that President Zelenskyy is somehow jeopardizing the peace process because he won't recognize Russian control of the Crimean Peninsula. Jan, who does Mr. Trump view as the aggressor in this war, Russia or Ukraine?
Well, he views both of them as aggressors. But here's the thing about understanding Trump. Because people take him literally in the moment instead of understanding strategically. So he generally has 4 different strategies. If he's criticizing Zelenskyy, really the issue is why 11 years later is Zelenskyy now fighting for Crimea when he could have taken action, or any previous politician could have taken action. So Trump tends to look at this and wonder why people think he's siding with Russia. He's not. What he wants is a ceasefire and some peace plan so that everyone can live without war.
Okay, so Gerald, let me ask you to pick up on that. Zelenskyy should have dealt with this a long time ago. Why does he suddenly mind so much about Crimea? And President Trump says Zelenskyy is so hard to deal with. I don't know what you think he should be doing differently.
Well, hello, Tom. I don't think that he should be doing anything differently. I don't know how he manages to put up with the most puerile president of the United States that we've experienced in our lifetimes. Donald Trump and his ignorant henchmen are not only demanding the complete capitulation of a sovereign state, Ukraine, but they're also risking the outbreak of further conflict for 3 reasons. First, I think the president and his entourage are naive. They're naive in believing that President Putin wants peace. He doesn't want peace at all. The President of the United States offered him a deal, and he basically dragged his feet, as everybody, all the commentators said he would, and he did. And last night, of course, he attacked, as he always does, a residential area, having the previous day taken 9 people out of a bus. So I'm afraid he's very, very naive. Secondly, I think that he and his entourage are ignorant. What Jan obviously does not know about is the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, signed by her president, President Bill Clinton, on behalf of the United States, signed by my Prime Minister, John Major, on behalf of the United Kingdom, and signed by Boris Yeltsin on behalf of the Russian Federation. And under that agreement, the sovereignty, independence, and existing borders of Ukraine were to be respected. So when it came to the annexation of Crimea, of course, we wanted to do something about it. But of course, the United States didn't want to do anything about it, didn't want to. And in fairness, other Western leaders also thought that it might risk escalation. And of course, Putin calculated that would be the case, that nobody would take action. And as a result of being able to act with complete impunity in seizing another country, he has, of course, been emboldened, as further tyrants around the world will also be emboldened. So the idea, Jan's idea, that they're both agree, I'm afraid, Jan, I find it deeply offensive. Zelenskyy did not order his troops on Moscow. Putin ordered his troops to the outskirts of Kyiv, and it hadn't been for in-law anti-tank missiles provided by the United Kingdom, he might well have taken Kyiv as well.
All right, let me pass it back to Jan. There we hear from Sir Gerald that people in the Trump administration are not just naive, they're also ignorant. He also takes offense with your comment that they're both equally to blame for this war starting in the first place. Your response?
Well, I find it kind of funny that he has an emotional reaction to just my opinion. And I could respond as well with kind of the name calling and the accusations of these ignorant and whatever. But that is not helping your viewers. What we need to look at is both sides don't want a ceasefire. They are requesting that the U.S. give Ukraine more ammunition to fight. But why? Why should we? Why do they need to be in a war? Why does Sir Gerald support that fact? Does he want peace? Is he a neocon? That's what I'm curious about, because I don't understand why people argue for this war to continue.
Well, let's ask him. Sir Gerald, your response. Why do you want this war to continue, and why should the United States pay for it?
Well, the United States hasn't paid for it. The United States has made a contribution, but their contribution has been less than the combined contribution of the European countries.
The question is, why do you want it to continue?
I don't want it to continue, but you are unbelievably naive, Jan. And I'm not attacking you. I'm attacking your president, who I think has forfeited the right to claim that the United States is the leader of the free world. There was an unprovoked aggression, an unprovoked brutal attack on a sovereign state. Your government had signed an agreement agreeing to respect the existing borders of Ukraine in 1994. Your president completely, I doubt he knew anything about the Budapest Memorandum, but you and the Russians are in flagrant breach of that agreement. The only country which is not in flagrant breach is the United Kingdom. And your naivety in suggesting that both sides are aggressors. It was Putin who launched an attack on Ukraine, and the Ukrainian people want their country back. They do not want it given away by the United States to Russia. And they're fighting for their country. You don't seem to understand that. It's not a question of wanting to continue the war. It is wishing to drive out the aggressor. And your president is all your president is doing is asking for a sovereign country to capitulate. And I can tell you, if you do that, and if President Trump succeeds, all he will do is to embolden Putin to attack elsewhere. Now, if you and the United States are no longer interested in Europe, that's fine. You have become an unreliable ally, and we shall have to sort ourselves out.
Okay,
we can no longer trust America.
Let's let Jan respond to that. The United States is no longer reliable. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's his opinion, that the U.S. is no longer reliable.
Of course, it's my opinion.
Please. The thing that I find interesting is that he's rehashing a lot of the old news and the Budapest Agreement and different things that we talked about in 1994. What is going on right now that these two leaders do not want to come to the table? They're putting different obstacles up. And what we have to look at is what they're saying and what their actions are. We shouldn't ever trust Putin to stand by something, because every time we get close for a ceasefire agreement, what does he do? He launches another attack. And that's what we should be looking at and analyzing, rather than rehashing and saying we're ignorant and naive. That gets nowhere, and it offers nothing to the viewers and the listeners.
Okay, so Gerald,
Well, I think it does inform the listeners. It informs the listeners of the facts. And the facts are, as I have stated.
The fact that I'm stupid and naive, that's an opinion.
Well,
it's not a fact.
I believe that the president, those around him, and those of you who support him, I believe are dangerously naive, and I have explained why. Because Putin has been able to act with impunity until now. And if he is not defeated, if he is not removed from a sovereign country which he has invaded, if he is not removed, then there's every possibility that he will either come again for the rest of Ukraine, which he's not been able to take as a result of the capitulation ordered by the President of the United States of America, or he will seek to attack elsewhere. He might even take the view that NATO no longer has the will to invoke Article 5, because Putin has made it crystal clear in his speech of July 2021 that he resented the fall of the Berlin Wall. He resented the reduction in influence of the Soviet Union, and he wishes to rebuild the Soviet Union. And that is what he has been doing. And you and those who think like you are being incredibly naive. And you have just said that you should never trust Putin. But that is exactly what the President of the United States and those of you who are supporting him are inviting us to do.
Jan.
No, what we are trying to do is get to peace. But you were a Secretary of Defense. And so why are you busy criticizing and calling us stupid and naive instead of laying out how you would deal with this situation in this moment with what is going on?
Okay, so Joe, what would you do? What would you do in this particular situation where you in the White House?
I'll tell you, are you asking me, Tom?
Yes.
Yes, I'd be absolutely crystal clear. Unless, I have said this from day one, for the last 3.5 years, I have said that if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, watch out elsewhere. And so I believe there is only one solution, and that is to drive out the aggressor. And I in fact, was in touch with my friend John Bolton 2 years ago, and I asked him, I said, why are Republican friends, because I'm a conservative, so I'm a Republican, why are the our Republican friends not supporting the Biden $66 billion defense package for Ukraine? And he came back and said to me, basically, Gerald, well, I'll put it politely, they do not understand. And that is the problem. We have got to defeat him. And simply, it beggars belief that you over there think that by calling on President Zelenskyy and the Ukrainian people to capitulate and hand over a large slug like Arizona or Texas or Wisconsin, hand those over to a brutal aggressor. I just understand when we were faced with Hitler's attempt to invade the United Kingdom, say he had successfully invaded part of Eastern England, would the United States president, would Roosevelt have said, oh, well, UK, give Suffolk and Norfolk and East Anglia to Adolf Hitler? I mean, for goodness sake, wake up over there in America. You are provoking the Third World War by your extraordinary naivety. And I'm sorry to speak in these terms. And I know my colleagues do not speak in these terms. My son-in-law is Shadow Secretary of State for Defense here. And I know they feel constrained. And I do not criticize Sir Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, for seeking to humor this deranged president of yours.
Okay,
right, Jan, let me can I just summarize for you? Sorry, Jan. So what we were just hearing there from Sir Gerald is an aggressor shouldn't be rewarded. And he's also saying that if this isn't dealt with in the right way, there'll be more to come. I mean, that's the essence of it, isn't it, Sir Gerald? How would you respond to that, Jan?
Well, number one, to bring up John Bolton, the ultimate neocon, Donald Trump said the reason he brought John Bolton with him when he met with the North Korean leader was that just his presence communicates neocon. But he had no respect for John Bolton. He brought him in to understand that side of it. But more importantly, is where the American people are, is we don't want any wars. And I have nothing to respond to Sir
Gerald.
Gerald, sorry about that, because again, we keep going to the past and rehashing and other people, and we're naive, but he hasn't told me how we could be smarter, how Trump should be smarter, how Rubio should be smarter, what should be done. That's what I want to hear.
I have told you, ramp up the defense contribution. United States, not alone in this, unfortunately. The United Kingdom has been the only one which has stepped up to the plate right at the outset.
Okay.
But the United States and other countries, you have dragged your feet.
Make more war.
Let me finish, Jan. Jan, let me finish if you don't mind.
Sorry.
The United States and others were slow to deliver equipment. The United States prevented us, President Biden prevented us from deploying the Storm Shadow missile, which we make with the French, because it's got some American components in it. This is absolutely disgusting. And the United States has dragged its feet. Eventually, President Biden did agree to a substantial package, but it was too little, too late. You have got to ramp it up now. And unless you understand that Putin has got to be defeated, he is throwing men in a most immoral fashion. He's throwing men at the front line. All you are doing is giving him a breathing space to reinforce his front line and take more territory. If you do not stop now, you are just appeasing a known aggressor. And I do not, for the life of me, understand why the people in the White House do themselves not understand this simple fact. It is a fact of life throughout history that if you humor an aggressor, he will take advantage. And that is what Putin is doing now. So my advice to you is do what we are doing, which is ramp up as much defense material, military equipment as you possibly can. I am going to Ukraine next month. I'm not delivering military equipment, but I'm going out there as part of a convoy, because that's what we are all doing here in this country. I don't know what you're doing in the United States, except calling for peace and doing nothing positive about it. But I am going to go out there to try and help the people of Ukraine.
Let's let Jan into the conversation and pick up on what you're saying there, Sir Gerald. I mean, what is the United States going to obtain on Ukraine's behalf, and what has it obtained so far?
Well, let's see. Zelenskyy wants us to still be protectors if there is a ceasefire. And according to Trump, part of that has to be that if we have a contract to mine their minerals, then our people will be there and we will be invested in keeping the peace. So those are the things that I'm looking for. Why that? And they're moving forward on that. They signed an agreement on March 19th to move it forward. So what they're trying to do, look, in negotiations and in a situation like this, what's most important to Putin, what's most important to Zelenskyy, and what is most important to the people of those nations who are having to live with war going on. And so that is the approach.
Let me respond to that. And
go ahead.
Your views in the Gulf will be interested to hear that in return for some Americans being on the ground, American civilians being on the ground in Ukraine, raping that country of its natural minerals, its rich natural resources. They will have no security guarantee. That is the peace proposal put by President Trump. It is venal, it is immoral, and the argument was that this would be help to repay what the Americans have already paid in terms of taxes to fund the export of defense equipment to Ukraine. We on the continent of Europe and the United Kingdom, we have asked for no such thing. And I think it's utterly venal of President Trump to seek at a time when Ukraine is fighting for its life to say, give me your natural resources. And I won't give you a security guarantee, but I'll have Americans in the country, and that will deter Putin. You are unbelievably naive, and on this particular count, utterly reprehensibly immoral.
Okay, I've got to let Jan respond to that. Immoral because of the minerals deal. Clearly, Sir Gerald strongly disapproves of that. Why do you think the minerals deal is justified? Just for the benefit of our viewers, according to the latest numbers, and do correct me if you don't agree with them, $287 billion has been spent on this war by the Americans and the Europeans combined, and that split is almost even. 122 billion the United States, 121.87, so almost the same number, just a couple of million short, by the Europeans. So, Jan, what's the justification for this minerals deal?
Well, make a deal. If we are bringing our troops over there, where is the benefit back to us? And so that is a form of negotiating. But, you know, if we look at the dynamic of this conversation, we won't come to an agreement because the ideology is different. I'm thinking, how do we get both of these people? How do we find out what is most important that will make them stop fighting? Versus Sir Gerald, who clearly wants this to go on. His ideology is very different. So I can be called naive because I don't agree with him, but that doesn't make it so. We are coming from two different positions, and that's the important thing to understand. And I am representing Trump's position as well because he doesn't want wars.
Sir Gerald, no more war, let's talk peace.
Dan. Don't be so fatuous he doesn't want war. Who of us does want war? None of us wants war. What has happened is that Putin and Russia have launched an unprovoked, massive, brutal aggression on a foreign country. And if it happened to you in Pearl Harbor, that was the last time you were invaded. And actually, when you were attacked on 9/11, who came to your aid? We came to your aid. NATO declared Article 5 for the first time ever. You are ungrateful, and I think that it is you fail to understand history. And if we do not stop Putin in his tracks, do you not understand? Not only will he seek further attempts to rebuild the Soviet Union, but all you are doing, and all your president is doing, is emboldening China. So what happens if China launches an attack, as President Xi has claimed he will do? What happens if they launch an attack on Taiwan? What are you going to do?
Okay. Thank you for the history lesson. The question is, what can you do today to bring Putin to the table? How can you set up an agreement that will cease all of this? With you, I don't have any response to your constant judgment, very negative judgments, because those are your opinions, but they are not facts. That's what you think of us because our ideology is different. And that is important for people to understand why it's hard to move it to a peace process.
Okay, we're running slightly short of time. I'd like to just bring the conversation to a conclusion because the United States, not just the president, but others in his administration have said that if we don't get to some sort of a satisfactory point in this process, the US will walk away. and they'll be done with this. I think President Trump said, "Take a pass," was his exact language. Sir Gerald, let me ask you, what would happen, and keep it brief if you will, both of you, what would happen if the US just walked away and said, it's not our problem anymore?
Well, I think America has pretty well walked away already. I mean, this morning, President Trump responded to another brutal attack on the capital city of Ukraine, which killed a fairly large number of civilians. I am not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv. I am the President of the United States, not happy. He is one-sided. They have pretty well walked away already. And my message is to my own government and to those of us on this side of the Atlantic. We cannot trust the United States. We need rapidly to rearm this country, and Europe, and we need to continue as we are doing, and as our Prime Minister has said we will do, to stand by Ukraine. And however long it takes, we have to drive out this brutal aggressor. And if we have to do it without the United States, as Winston Churchill said, the United States generally doesn't come up, but in the end they do. I think it's been a disastrous time since the election of President Biden, and amplified massively. And I'm not just giving you an opinion, Jan. I'm explaining to you in words of one syllable what has happened.
All right. That
Putin has taken advantage, and he will continue to do so.
Sorry.
And my view is widely shared on this side of the Atlantic.
Okay, so Gerald, Jan, we're going to give you the last word. If the US walks away, what happens? I'll tell you one thing that won't happen. President Trump won't get a Nobel Peace Prize, will he?
Does he care? No.
Oh, he'd like the Nobel Peace Prize, wouldn't he?
You know what? No, he doesn't really care. He really doesn't. You know, the fact that you think that he cares about his ego and acknowledgement, no. We know how much he cares about the country and what he wants to do. I am just so perplexed because, you know, I was on a panel with the former Defense Secretary Ben Wallace, and he raised a very good point. Europe is learning that America is not going to bankroll and be the protector. The Marshall Plan is no longer in existence. And it's time, he said, that the UK learns to stand on its own 2 feet. Well, if the Ukraine-Russia war is more of a threat to the European nations, why don't they come together? Why doesn't a leader emerge who's trying to bring things together or resolve the issue? That's what I'm looking for. I can't go to the past because we can't change the past, but I can look at the roadblocks and the obstacles today and how do we overcome them. And we need to understand steps that we can take. And whether Sir Gerald doesn't agree with the mineral deal, the fact is that he's already decided that we will be raping. See, you have to listen to the words he uses, that we'll be raping the nation when in fact we will be investing money and have our people there. And so we can't have a good discussion if he's using terms raping as opposed to how do we bring this to a closure?
All right, well, we've brought this conversation to a closure, but I'd like to thank you both very much indeed. Jan, Halper Hayes, you had the last word. Also, a very big thank you as well to Sir Gerald Howarth. Great to have you both with us once again here on Al Arabiya News.
Thank you.
We're going to stay with Ukraine and get some more analysis now from California. We can speak to Colonel Brendan Kearney, a former U.S. Marines chief of staff in Europe. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Colonel. We were just speaking there to two guests who had obviously very different opinions. And I put this question to them. Who is the aggressor in this war? Is it Russia or is it Ukraine? What's your answer to that very simple question?
Well, it is a very simple question, and a very simple answer is Russia is the aggressor.
Okay, so why is it that we're seeing so much pressure being applied by the Trump administration on President Zelenskyy? We've heard in the last day or two President Trump describing him as hard to deal with and being tricky and dragging his feet. I mean, what's he doing wrong in the eyes of President Trump?
Well, his basic mistake is that he is not agreeing with President Trump, and that bothers Trump immensely. But once again, I strongly believe that President Zelenskyy has got the backing of history and has got the moral high ground on this particular issue. Unfortunately, I don't believe the president's approach follows along those same logic lines that I have.
So you don't think there's anything that President Zelenskyy should be doing differently at this particular moment?
No, I think President Zelenskyy is doing the right thing in terms of participating in the talks and trying to find a solution. The problem is President Trump is promoting a solution that requires primarily Crimea being retained by the Russians. And I think the Ukrainians are absolutely right that their territory is something that should be returned to them in full.
And it seems that President Trump has had a bit of a rethink on the issue of the Crimean Peninsula, because there is a message dating back to his first presidency, during which time President Trump said the United States rejects Russia's attempted annexation of Crimea and pledges to maintain this policy until Ukraine's territorial integrity is restored. I mean, what kind of a pledge was that?
Not a very good one, Tom. I think we both agree on that. I don't understand why he is taking the position he is, other than if he's trying to force a peace. And a forced peace is not going to be a lasting peace. And I just don't see the Ukrainians being able to go ahead and enter into that type of agreement that involves that much territory being ceded to Russian aggressors.
President Zelenskyy says the Constitution would prevent him from doing so anyway. Does that sound right to you?
It does. It does. Again, President Zelenskyy has to operate within his laws, not within the United States laws or President Trump's perception of what is right or wrong. This is a country that was invaded. This is a country that is defending itself. And this is a country that has to choose how to make a lasting peace.
Okay, and where do you think Ukraine's European allies sit on all of this?
I think the Europeans have got a much more pragmatic approach to this than the United States has, unfortunately. I believe the Europeans are going to back President Zelenskyy. I think there's enough historical experience with Russia that the Europeans know that you cannot, under any circumstances, go ahead and let the Russians dictate the terms of this peace. Europe has got to face these guys down, and unfortunately, I think that's where it's going to lay until President Trump decides to go ahead and fully back Ukraine.
We had the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio no-showing at a meeting in London yesterday. The Special Envoy, Steve Witkoff, is heading to Moscow to meet with President Putin on Friday. I mean, what sort of a message do you think the Trump administration is trying to send to America's traditional allies at this moment?
Well, unfortunately, I think this is a rather unsophisticated attempt at a little bit of bullying. I can't think of a better word or a more technically sophisticated word to describe it, but I think the United States is pushing itself around a little too much here with this type of ham-handed approach. I think the Europeans have got to be involved in this, and I like the fact that they are. And the Europeans and the United States should be going forward together in concert. But absent the United States being a willing participant, the Europeans are going to have to solve this.
What would your advice to the Trump administration be on how best to move forward at this particular moment?
It'd be very simple. I think the effort at peace is good. At trying to facilitate peace talks, I think is a wonderful effort. But let's go ahead with and in concert with the Europeans. And let's make sure that the Russians know that we are serious about supporting Ukraine, in all fairness, with their agreement with Russia. It's not a United States agreement that needs to be dictated. This needs to be an agreement between Ukraine and Russia.
Now, we've been hearing the Trump administration saying that a deal is very close. I mean, what sounds to you like being kind of these last-minute sticking points if the deal is indeed that close?
Well, I hate to say this, but I don't believe the deal is that close. President Trump has traditionally gone ahead and put sort of lipstick on a pig, an American expression, oftentimes when there still are problems out there that arise. And I think it's good to have a good attitude about this, but there's nothing that is indicating to us out here, I think an impartial observer, that the deal is close. The Russians are continuing to pound Ukraine. The rhetoric doesn't seem to be changing from Russia. Maybe we'll get a sense of what's going on, Tom, this weekend when both President Trump and Zelenskyy are at the Pope's funeral in Rome to see if there's a warm handshake, any backslapping, something that would give us a visual indication that these two are talking to each other in a meaningful way. And maybe then we can honestly say a deal is close.
Well, President Trump has said he's not sure if a meeting will take place at the Vatican on Saturday, so we'll have to stay tuned on that one. But in terms of the situation on the battlefield, just lastly, I mean, what's your understanding on where things stand at this particular moment?
Well, once again, we're looking at the Western Front in 1918. We have a very, very tough fight going on between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and of course, small participation on the part of the North Koreans. Little gains on both sides, no great movement. No one is in command of the air. So it's a static situation. And unfortunately, those type of situations bring with it a great deal of casualties. And I think both sides are suffering. And certainly the civilians, Ukrainian civilians, are suffering with this pounding that continues, despite the Easter pause that never occurred. It's really, really a tough battlefield situation that's going on in Ukraine.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Really appreciate you speaking to us once again. Colonel Brandon Kearney, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thanks, Tom.
So at this point in the week, we've decided we're going to take a look back at some of the main developments across the Atlantic and see what's been happening in the world of US politics. And to help us today, we're joined by Angie Wong, a Republican committee member from Florida, who joins us now. Angie, thank you very much indeed for being with us. Quite a lot to talk about because it has been an eventful week in US politics and for US relations with trade partners. First of all, the US Defense Secretary is finding himself in the spotlight again after reports of sensitive information shared on a second Signal chat. Do you think Pete Hegseth's job is in danger?
Oh, very much so. Democrats are certainly taking on this matter because it's actually a very simple matter. We have security protocols in this country, especially when it comes to private military movements. And he cannot be, Pete Hegseth, our defense secretary, should know better than to be using an open sourced communication tool like Signal. I mean, this is very dangerous for our national security. I'm just curious why he didn't learn this in orientation when he took the job. So President Trump right now is still defending him, as well as the press secretary and some Republicans. But even myself as a Republican, I'm scratching my head going, just get off the platform. Why can't he do that?
I mean, just looking at what's happening at the Pentagon, would you say all is well? Because one Pentagon spokesperson resigned last week and talked about drama, talked about turnover, talked about a full-blown meltdown at the Pentagon. I mean, it all sounds pretty extraordinary, doesn't it?
From the outside looking in, it certainly looks that way. It looks like a rookie mistake. And unfortunately, there are lots of rookie cabinet members amongst the Trump administration. Something like this should have been handled internally, but instead it got blown up in the media because guess what? The secretary is a media personality, so he is taking the hit on this. Unfortunately, there were lots of fall guys from his own team that were fired recently by President Trump, although that did not make the story go away. The story keeps growing and it keeps getting more and more legs. At some point, I think Democrats may see a win if Pete Hegseth does not turn the page on this. I don't know how he can. Normally in media, you just switch to another topic. This time, this story has been going on for several weeks. So I think President Trump has to acknowledge that this is a serious matter. This is not just, oh, it's signal, this is an old story. Well, it doesn't brush off that easily because it does concern our national security.
And what about within the party itself? What sort of a figure does Pete Hegseth cut?
Within the party, he's a pretty newcomer. I mean, for the most part, he was a news anchor, and that's how most families here in the U.S. knows him, is because he did the morning shows here. So he's very familiar. It's starting to look more and more like he was hired, not so much for his professionalism and certainly not for his know-how amongst the being a federal worker. It's more because he can deliver the message and he looks good on TV. So, you have to show me at some point that you can actually do this job. And I think more and more Republicans are scratching their heads going, I'm not sure about this one. We'd like to see some actual movement, not just doing more and more media appearances, which is what he's been doing to defend himself. At some point, he's got to stop defending himself and actually start performing, doing the work.
The White House press secretary sort of really echoing President Trump, as you'd expect her to. The president stands strongly behind Secretary Hegseth, she said. I mean, do you think she'd have said that if perhaps there were a few cracks emerging? I mean, do you think, is the essence of my question, that the support President Trump has expressed for Pete Hegseth, would you say that support is intact?
I don't know it's intact today, but with President Trump, things can unravel tomorrow. As President Trump heads to his first 100 days, we're going to start measuring what his achievements are, what his successes are. And I think the media now, along with Republicans, are willing to call out when things were sloppy, such as this signal debacle. So when President Trump does something right, we're happy to praise him. But if it's sloppy, we're also going to make sure he knows about it.
Okay, Angie, another Trump administration heavy hitter facing some challenges is, of course, the billionaire Elon Musk. And speaking to investors in his auto firm Tesla, Elon Musk said that he would spend less time from now on in his role spearheading the DOGE efficiency department. However, he's confirmed that he was not stepping down. There you are, it's written there, not stepping down from that special government role. This, of course, comes as Tesla stocks and prices and profits dive after some backlash over Elon Musk's decisions at DOGE, including slashing federal staff numbers. Okay, so just looking at the situation there with Elon Musk, I mean, he was only ever going to do 130 days, wasn't he? Because that's the length of a mandate for someone on this type of a contract. But do you think the DOGE's future, I mean, I'm talking about the whole department, do you think the future of that department is in doubt?
Oh, I think that's one of the most successful stories to come from the first 100 days of the new Trump administration is the DOGE efficiency audits. I mean, and we're now starting to see the same exact rollout in states versus federal government. I think the reason why Elon has to step down is because there is an internal feud between him and also the Trump tariffs that affects his own businesses like Tesla. I mean, Tesla in the last quarter has seen a 42% dip. And that's, I'm sure his board of directors over at Tesla is not very happy about him being best friends with the Trump administration at the same time hurting his businesses. So I think that's one of the reasons why he has to go back to his own businesses and take care of those things. But no, look, Tesla relies heavily on the global supply chain. And if the US is going to go to war with China and other suppliers, well, Tesla is going to be affected. I mean, I don't see how this wouldn't be a conflict of interest for Elon Musk.
Sure. I mean, it puts him in a tricky position, doesn't it? And I'm just wondering whether you think that's where he was coming from when he called Trump's economic advisor, Peter Navarro, dumber than a sack of bricks. That's not the sort of language we hear very often. Do you think there's been some friction between Elon Musk and some other people in the Trump inner sanctum?
Certainly, because Elon Musk has had Trump's ear since even before the election day, right? So, and rightly so. I mean, he's a great advisor, and he's done very well for our country with the DOGE initiatives and other things. But for now, if there is a conflict and his business comes first, remember, this is how he made his billions. He's not going to give that up based on an internal fight between himself and Peter Navarro over this trade. Ultimately, I think that this is a peaceful exit. I don't think Elon Musk will ever leave entirely, but he just may not be so visible. He may not just hang out with Mar-a-Lago, golfing with Trump every day. So maybe that might slow down a little bit.
So not a permanent exit. I mean, could there be another role in the offing for Elon Musk in another capacity? I don't know if the rules stipulate that he has 130 days in one job or whether that's a cumulative 130 days in the entire administration, but could he come back?
He could come back, and certainly he's always going to be a senior advisor to Trump on some capacity. Ultimately, the role for heading up DOGE has already been filled, and that team has bulked up in numbers over the last few weeks. So the DOGE initiative will continue. Whether or not Trump is going to be, replying to Elon Musk's texts, that's still to come. I think they're still very friendly. I think Trump respects him. Although there are fractions. Look, this is Washington. Everybody wants Trump's ear, and Elon Musk has it. And the minute that people feel like he's stepping away, someone else will try to jump in to give him advice. And I think Elon, he's a global player. He understands the fractures from everything that's from the tariffs to all the other Trump initiatives. He sees how all of this goes, and he can also monitor it using X. Right? That's one of the almost like the crystal balls. You can see what people are saying and how people are reacting to your policies. This is better than any political director can do. And Elon Musk holds the keys to that. So I think that friendship and that relationship will continue on even after Elon Musk's exit next month.
Okay, well, that leads us neatly into our next chapter, because, of course, in the midst of these national issues, the reciprocal tariffs we've been talking about between the United States and China are sparking concerns of a trade war. Some would say that war has already begun. President Trump, however, saying yesterday that the high tariff on Chinese goods may come down substantially as the two countries engage in discussions. Let's take a listen.
Well, China, look, I have great relationships in China, and with President Xi in particular, but China has been charging us massive tariffs for many years. That's one of the reasons they were able to steal so many of our companies. They took our companies out of America, and they built their plants in China. And one of those things, so now we're reversing it, but at levels that nobody's ever seen before. No, we're going to get along great with China, I have no doubt about it.
Okay, President Trump speaking there about tariffs, notably on China, because, of course, China facing the biggest levies of all. The situation's changing pretty fast. It's quite hard to follow exactly where we are with tariffs because the policy and the directives change quite quickly. But do you think people there in the United States are starting to feel some of the effects of the tariffs?
Oh, well, absolutely. And mostly because of the uncertainty of the market. One day we're going to we're going to tariff every single country. The next day, no, that country might be exempt. Another day, no, we need steel and we need semiconductors. It looks messy. The rollout was terrible because what it's caused is uncertainty in the global markets. Because Trump could change his mind every 2 minutes. And that is, markets can't handle that. In fact, it was Richard Branson who came out today saying, we can't predict what's going on. And it's so uncertain that people basically stop buying, because if you buy stock today, it depresses tomorrow based on something Trump says on the news. So that is what's happening. And now the criticisms are coming out, because this is not how you handle a tariff rollout. You can't just say one thing and then change your mind the next day. So all of this has been affected now. Most recently, just even prior to me coming on the show, tariffs are now back down to 50-60% for that. And Trump has just made that announcement on the Chinese tariffs. Just yesterday, it was 200%. So, at some point, something's got to give. You got to give clear direction, especially to shareholders and to businesses around the world. You can't just, make up numbers like this.
Okay, so I mean, clearly the markets are rattled, but moving from Wall Street to Main Street, I mean, that uncertainty that you talked about, is that denting consumer confidence, do you think, on Main Street?
It hasn't just yet, only because I think when you run the numbers and you do the audits, you realize, well, the US probably doesn't make enough light switches or any of the things that we consume on a daily basis, right? And then, so now you're having these adjustments. Before, it seemed almost like a bluff. These tariffs numbers were jumping into the hundreds all of a sudden, and both sides were playing. Luckily, there was some diplomacy that was played that says, let's cool the temperature a little bit, let's start some negotiations. I think that's what's beginning right now, because we're starting to understand both sides needs each other. You can't, the US doesn't produce all that it consumes. And we will need to, at least for a certain period of time, play with other countries and also import from other countries and export to them. So I think those things are coming around. That's why I say the rollout for these tariffs it's been very messy. I know that Trump was trying to use it as a negotiation tactic. Doesn't always work that way. And I think now that it's been several weeks into the making, we're starting to see the backfiring of it. And I think Trump is looking for a graceful exit from this.
Okay, another dispute and, let's say, argument that's brewing there in the United States, the prestigious Harvard University, very much in the line of fire over differences in ideology with the Trump administration. This issue can be traced back to the pro-Palestinian protests on Harvard campuses, which caught the attention of the government's anti-Semitism task force. Well, Harvard now faces a $2.2 billion funding freeze after declining proposed changes. Well, the university has now begun a legal challenge against the Trump administration. Angie, I mean, should the US government be weighing in when it comes to the governance, the discipline, the hiring, the admission policies at a university?
Well, universities can run themselves. And here's the thing. If universities and institutions like Harvard were not taking federal funds, it wouldn't have to entertain any sort of mandates from the president or any federal worker. But if it does take federal funds, yes, it does have to oblige to some guidelines. Now, President Trump wants the admissions, hiring, and curriculum changed at Harvard, and Harvard's president, Alan Gerber, said, no, we're not doing that. So both sides are going to take this to the fight. Now, Harvard law students are probably, salivating at this because we know that this is all going to end up in the Supreme Court at some point. And maybe that's, the showdown. But look, Harvard has a $53 billion endowment. $2.2 billion per year. It's not going to really make a dent. And quite honestly, if I were in the board of directors discussing this at Harvard, I would say, well, you could sit it out for 4 years, right? I don't know if this really matters. I think the lawsuit that has been put out there, the legal case, I think that's just going to just delay things and buy some time while all this goes forward. Look, the same thing happened at Columbia University, but they reversed and they said, look, we don't want your federal dollars and we'll sit this one out. You can't mandate what we teach here and you can't tell us what to do. This is, I guess, Trump's bullying doesn't work at these universities. And I think if all the Ivies stood together, they could probably just wait it out.
Just really quickly before we move on, I mean, if we've got here the Trump administration versus Harvard University, who comes out on top?
Unfortunately, in this case, maybe Harvard, because they've been around for several hundred years. And 2.2, although, yes, it does dip into their a lot of their medical research budgets. I'm sure they can make that up with donations. But look, at another university, the University of Pennsylvania, where Trump himself is an alumni, they took down his portrait in the clubs. So, I think that taking a fight with the universities, he can do it all day long, but honestly, he's got other bigger agendas to achieve. I think leave the Ivies alone this time, just achieve some of your more broad stroke national policies.
All right, Angie, we're going to move on because we're almost out of time. I just want to ask you because inbound international tourism to the United States has fallen at least 10% during the month of March compared to the same period last year. That's according to data shared by the Commerce Department. Outbound US tourists have also increased 1.6%. Well, let's listen to what President Trump had to say when asked about this shift.
You know, there's a little nationalism there, I guess, perhaps. It's not a big deal. And our dollar is a little bit on the low side. And that means that a lot of tourism is going to come in. But I could see a little bit nationalism at work. And I can see it likewise with us not wanting to go to certain countries. But that'll work out very easily.
Okay, President Trump brushing it off. You know, we're talking here about a pretty record decline in US arrivals, in foreign arrivals in the United States by tourists. Is this something you're hearing about? Do you get the impression that people are indeed changing their minds about visiting the United States? And if so, why?
Well, you know, the messaging from the Trump administration for the last few weeks has been, well, there's no welcoming mat for foreigners, right? It's a very unwelcoming climate. There's been a cancellation of a lot of student visas, and cultural exchange may not be high on the Trump agenda right now. So the politics are not aligned with the tourism. And look, the tourism industry in the US is over $2 trillion a year. It provides 18 million jobs in this country. So President Trump should maybe think about changing his tune on some of the American nationalism over welcoming foreigners, because we do like that tourist money.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about billions of dollars in losses here, Angie. I mean, does it feel like there's a bit of a boycott going on? Is that sort of what your friends are telling you as well?
Oh, we're seeing it every single day. We're seeing more domestic travel than international travel even. The Secretary of State has even issued some travel alerts. I know that in Europe, they've also issued travel alerts on US travel. So, you know, all of this is wrapped up in the politics and the messaging coming out of the White House, which is at the moment, foreigners are not as welcomed. So, you know, we do need to be careful of that.
Okay, well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. Angie Wong, Republican committee member in Florida. Real pleasure talking to you, and thanks for helping us digest all of those topics.
Thank you.